In 1996, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded jointly to Bishop Carlos Bello and José Ramos Horta, who was the the travelling spokesperson for the East Timorese people. Bishop Bello was the spokesperson inside the country. He couldn't travel so much, but Ramos Horta, his job, his responsibility, his role was to tell the world about what was happening in East Timor. That was a hugely important role as well, because most of the countries of the world had accepted the occupation of East Timor by Indonesia. They didn't want to make waves about it, they didn't want to ask questions. So both Bishop Bello and Ramos Horta had that role of telling the world what was happening. And of course the awarding of the Nobel Prize brought much more international attention to the situation of East Timor. In 1998, the long presidency of President Suharto in Indonesia came to an end. When he fell from power, President Habibie took his place. President Habibie had been under increasing pressure to give the East Timorese the possibility to decide freely for themselves their future. Habibie offered the possibility of a referendum in 1999. In preparation for the referendum, Bishop Bello did a speaking tour of Australia and New Zealand. He spoke in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, and when he was in Wellington he spoke in the Assembly Hall at St Patrick's College in Kilburnie. I attended that meeting. I felt my Spanish language skills would be helpful, so I made an offer to the Archbishop of Wellington that if it was needed I would be prepared to go and assist for some time in East Timor. Through the 1990s, Caritas Aotearoa New Zealand and Caritas Australia had been establishing links with East Timor. Some small development projects were taking place with their help. A request actually came from Caritas Dili to Caritas Australia and Caritas Aotearoa New Zealand for support in their office. Some of their people had been under threat and had to go into hiding. They were facing increased demands because of the pressure that was building up around the preparations for the referendum. So in May 1999 I went with 4 religious sisters from Australia to assist in East Timor. When I arrived in East Timor, we were slightly ahead of the arrival of the United Nations, who were going to be running the referendum. So they arrived, set up their base and started the process of preparing for the referendum. That meant registering people to vote and finding places for polling booths and voting stations. When I arrived, I worked at Caritas Dili doing various jobs. One part was helping maintain communication with the outside world in English. Another part was keeping statistics about how many displaced people there were in East Timor. A third role was helping provide those displaced people with different supplies. And the fourth thing that we did in preparation for the possible withdrawal of Indonesian support for East Timor was a survey of all the different medical stations and medical facilities around East Timor in case we needed to staff those on the occasion of an Indonesian withdrawal. In the preparation for the referendum, various militias were being promoted by the Indonesian army to intimidate people in villages and around East Timor into voting to stay with Indonesia. We discovered that there was a large group of displaced people hidden in the bush near the border with West Timor. So Caritas Dili and other agencies that were working to support displaced people decided that we would run a convoy of supplies to this particular place. We would also take people from the media with us so that they could take photos and film of the displaced people and what was happening, so that that would be evidence to the outside world of the process, the difficulties that the referendum process was under. So we travelled out in a convoy. It was about 3 or 4 hours to this particular place. We shared the supplies. We had medical supplies, blankets, covering for the people that were there. And the next morning, the next day, we came to return to Dili. On our way back, when we stopped to let the Indonesian authorities, because the Indonesian police and army were in charge of security preparations for the referendum, when we stopped to let them know where we had been, we were attacked by one of these militia groups. About 20 of them suddenly appeared out of nowhere to attack our stationary convoy. This was a great surprise and shock to us, and although they attacked us with machetes, only a few injuries happened. No one was killed, but of course we all had to flee from that attack. So we jumped back in our vehicles and started driving off. Everyone either took cover, hid in surrounding bush or in shops, or jumped on the back of the trucks and cars. We had with us a Portuguese camera crew who had come to record the convoy and the displaced people. They happened to be filming when the militia attacked us. So a small portion of that attack before we fled in our cars was captured on TV film, and that became quite important to witness to the world that yes, there were these militias operating in East Timor. They were operating under the noses of the Indonesian police and security forces, and also that they were prepared to attack not just the East Timorese people but the international witnesses and assistants that had come for the referendum. So I think this militia attack was not really designed necessarily to damage or kill anyone in our convoy, but to intimidate us, and also to frame the United Nations as a non-neutral participant. The United Nations was organising the referendum, but the narrative from Indonesia was that the UN was actually supporting independence and that they were causing trouble, because during the attack a homemade gun was thrown into one of the UN vehicles, and afterwards the accusation was made that the militia hadn't attacked the convoy, but in fact shots had been fired from the UN vehicle towards innocent people in this particular place. This was completely the reverse of what happened. Despite myself not being injured in the attack, in the subsequent days and weeks there was a little bit of post-traumatic shock that I suffered. As it happened, my visa was coming to an end about 3 weeks after that particular attack, and so when my 2-month visa came to an end, I did return to New Zealand, and I was here when the referendum took place and when the subsequent destruction took place. It was a very worrying time for me. Following the announcement of the referendum result and the destruction of much of East Timor that occurred, many people were displaced and made refugees. I was of course very worried about the people I'd got to know in East Timor. Fortunately, even though they couldn't return to their homes immediately, things settled down a little bit in the subsequent months following the referendum, and I was able to go back 6 months after the referendum to visit East Timor and see the people I had worked with again. In 2001, I was invited to return as part of the New Zealand Observer team for the first elections for a parliament for East Timor that took place. When I think of what life is like in East Timor now, I'm first of all very happy that the people have had the chance to build their own nation and make their decisions for themselves. Life hasn't always been easy since independence for East Timor. Building your own country and building your own society is difficult. It has its challenges. Every society is complex, and they still face the question of economic and social development, but they are deciding their own future.